Thank you for being here today, for choosing to share your Sunday afternoon in this way, to come together to practice. I'm here at Yokoji, where we just had a busy weekend with a guest group, large guest group, a lot of quite a joyful group, quite a noisy group. Nice to have their energy here. Also nice when it returns to just being quiet too. It's part of the way uh, Yokoji supports itself financially. Is to we have these rentals during the what's become a more condensed guest season. The guest season used to run early March to end to mid June. We've shortened that to April till May, till Memorial Day, and then in the fall, instead of September through until Thanksgiving, we're starting a little later too. And part of this condensing is because of the change in the dramatic changes in weather, which everywhere it seems is experiencing, and here is often quite magnified. We I swear we went from 90-degree days to needing to wear a fleece in the mornings. Like within a couple of days, it just flipped from being hot to being cold, and now fall has arrived, and I'm grateful for that. We sometimes we have a very long summer and a very long winter here, mountains. I think I was in the desert recently, just a couple of days ago, and I don't think the snowbirds are back. Is that right? Not quite yet. Another couple of weeks, maybe October. I always tell because the parking gets a little bit busier at the bank and places like things start to get busier. So thank you again for being here. I'm gonna raise up a koan from my well-worn copy of the Book of Equanimity at this point, which I return to kind of over and over again. Sometimes I pick up some other koan collections and I'll look for something, and then I put it back down. And I often come back to this collection of 100 koans as being my favorite kind of source text for Zen interactions. 100 cases here. So I'm going to bring up one of these cases today. This is case 79, advancing a step. It's quite a lot here. It's quite a long one. I'll read it through. Attention. Zen master Chosa told a monk to go and ask the hermit Osho, what was it like before you saw Nansen? And for a little context, Nansen was one of the most eminent, well-known Zen teachers of the day. So Chosa told the monk to go and ask the hermit Osho, what was it like before you saw Nansen? The monk did so, and the hermit was silent for a while. The monk asked, what was it like after seeing Nansen? Then what? And the hermit replied, nothing special. The monk returned to Chosa and recounted this story to him, and Chosa said, there is a man on top of 100-foot pole. Though they have a degree of understanding, it's not yet the real thing. From the top of the 100-foot pole, they should advance a step, and the 10 directions of the world will be their entire body. The monk asked, how do you advance a step from the top of a 100-foot pole? And Chosa replied, the mountains of Ro province, the waters of Ray province. The monk said, I don't understand. Chosa said, the 4 oceans and the 5 lakes are within the emperor's control. Okay, so a little cultural context here, right? After all, we're reaching back into Tang Dynasty China for this for these cases. I read something recent. I was listening to a podcast series about ancient Chinese history. I grew up with a very Eurocentric version of history, right? So everything was from the kind of a North American context, pretty much, with a little smattering of the rest of the world in. And and as I broadened out my late study of history, because I love history, you realize, wow, there's so much more. There's so much more depth, and there's so much more that has occurred. I grew up in the UK, which really did consider itself the center of the world for a long period of time, right? Like one of the major colonial powers, of course, and kind of was the center of the world in that sense, like how Rome had been, and that's something really we might deal with a little bit here in our neck of the woods as the United States, being like the kind of the preeminent nation in terms of power and influence. Let's put it that way. One of the things I learned in this podcast was like even the name China. That's just a name we use, right? And that's like the name in Europe, and then we call it China. They don't, in China, it's not China. They don't use that word. I could pronounce it terribly. I think it's Wangdo, I think, but I'm going from memory of a couple of days ago, which is already very shaky, right? So, but they have a completely different name for their own country, like how we call Germany, and they would call it Deutschland. I find that quite interesting, and we just pick our names for things rather than the origin names. All right, so this is set back long ago in this area of China, and here we have a teacher, a Zen teacher, was a little something different than a meditation teacher. Meditation, our main practice, long storied, long tradition. Who knows how long? Predates anything being written down or even remembered as an oral tradition. Must go really deep into the past. I have a book on my shelf here called The Mind in the Caves, which is a well-known book on Paleolithic art, right? In the cultures, like in the Neolithic cultures. And one could imagine, like back in that distant time, surely people must have sat in perhaps in front of a fire, or another a place of comparative safety. Like we're fortunate to have this safe container for us to practice in now. That isn't always so for people, and to just be able to sit and contemplate the great mystery of being here. How long must that stretch back for human beings? Right, when that consciousness arose, and it took a little side road in the evolution of awareness and consciousness, whereas for human beings something shifted, and we began to experience the world in a subject object relationship and become aware of ourselves as distinct, right? Something curious, which perhaps we're unique on the earth in that regard, perhaps not. Who really knows? We can't quite test that, but it seems from the feedback that we get from other animals and creatures that they don't have that dualistic comprehension of the world, which can recognize their own separateness, and with that recognize their own impermanence, which lies at the heart of the Buddhist tradition. The Buddha set out to deeply conflicted and disturbed by old age, sickness, and death, deeply disturbed by the fleeting nature of human life and the obvious limitations of safety and material gain. And in in that realization, went to look for a teacher. He went to look for a teacher. He studied, very remembered by name. I don't have them or have them memorized, but he studied with a couple of principal teachers who were meditation instructors of the day, who taught meditation techniques. So that was an alive tradition in that time. Learning meditation and studying in order to inquire into this mystery of being, in order to inquire into this self nature. And that's what we're engaged in our practice now. We don't have to identify as Buddhists in order to sit and meditate. But if we do contemplate stillness and presence in sitting, then we practice as a Buddha. We don't have to be called identified as a Buddhist to be a Buddha in that sense, right? Because that word translates as one who is awake to thusness, one who is awake to this reality. As human beings, of course, we're very prone to, we create stories, right? We create stories about the world, about our lives, about the lives of other people. We inherit stories. When we look back at history, really, that we're reading a story. It's not what happened, right? It's an approximation of what happened. And there's that well-worn phrase that says history is written by the victors. Usually that's so too. The histories get a certain history that gets carried forward. So we live very much with story and with narrative in life. It's a way that humans communicate to each other and also to ourselves. But when it comes to the essence of the mystery of life, right? The essence of our being, however we want to describe this, meditation is going beyond narrative or story of our experience and meaning, and rather shining the light of awareness into what is real now. So it's a very practical method. It's a very practical approach. If we want to understand this, then look at and experience the nature of this, and then we become realized and actualized about this. If we only experience life and understand life through the narrative of a dualistic function, then we're always limited somewhat to a story or an idea and a belief system, opinions and ways of organizing the world. Meditation disrupts that and brings us into contact, into experience with this ineffable and mysterious being that we are. Each one of us is. So Chosa here, who's both a meditation teacher and a Zen teacher, sends one of his students off. There's a lot of this that happens in Koan study. There's a lot of teachers say you should go and visit so and so, and I wonder if part of it was to just get rid of people for a few weeks. Because it's just being asked constantly questions, people around, and people have a lot of energy and a lot of practice in the tradition is sort of wearing out doubt and going through frustration and digging through difficulty, and that can be a difficult energy. So sometimes going out for a long hike or travel for a few days is a good way to move through things. And that's certainly a good way to shake things up and shift perspective. Right? We often get a different perspective when circumstances where we live or where we visit, when we move out of what's very common to us, and we move into a different culture or a different way. And then the mind will adapt, but sometimes there's a little bit of catch up while we adapt. So he sends the monk off to ask a hermit. Now, the hermit in the Zen tradition would often be people who have studied for a long time and reached a level of understanding in meditation and in practice where they've moved out of the busyness of practice in community, probably living close to the community in order to be able to, get food and to be able to stay in touch, but go off and live on their own. So it's a popular practice in China during this time. So we can assume that the hermit is pretty well practiced. Joseph sent a monk to ask him how it was when he practiced with this with the great teacher Nansen, there who would have been kind of a rock star Zen teacher of the day. Everybody would have known his name. The teacher of Joshu, famous teacher. And the hermit, in his first response, when asked how was that before, um, he just remained silent. That's the response, to remain silent. Now, often in meditation practice, in the Zen tradition, a response with silence can be a good response. Right? To just be able to reveal or show one's present awareness. Just how was it? What was it before you saw Nansen? Who were you then? Who were you 20 years ago? Who were you 30 years ago, 40 years ago? The hermit just remained silent. What kind of answer is that? How was it? In one sense, we can look at that and say, well, how was it? It was this. It was this now, then. And now it's this now. But it's always this. It's a curious thing to say, how was it back in the day when you did something, how was it then? I was thinking about that. It's just like back when I met my teacher, Tenshin, who was my teacher, when I look back and it's murky. I don't remember exactly where we were. Actually, no, I think I do. We were at a meditation venue called Crosby Hall, and I met him. I don't remember particularly the conversation. It sort of all just blends into my first experience of a retreat with a teacher. But we can be asked about anything and says, how was it when you were living, for me, back in the UK, or how was it for you? And we look back to something. And immediately the mind goes to story. It's like when somebody asks you, how you doing? Often like I have a lot of phone conversations and there's that interaction at the beginning where you say, hey, how have you been? And it's sort of an absurd question. Because it's like, well, how long do you really want to know and how long have you got? Is that, especially if you're actually calling about something very specific, but you don't want to be rude. So we have that preamble that says, and it's heartfelt, how are you? But usually we just say, oh, fine, or yeah, pretty, or good. Or some people are very positive, just say, I'm excellent, I'm wonderful. When people say that, I always just say, oh, that's great. But there's often a part of me that just wants to dig in and says, are you really? Is it really? Is that, prod that a little bit? Is that how it is for you? I don't, right? So we can have that kind of, that interaction. But when asked, how was it something? Gosh, there's no direct access to that. In one sense, in terms of circumstances, of the flimsiness of memory. But there is direct access to it in terms of it's always this present aware experience. Now, the content of that present aware of experience is very changeable, like the weather. We may be feeling grumpy, tired, could be angry, or maybe we're feeling joyful and happy, or just somewhat neutral. Right? We travel through on these roads in this human life. Like that, Koan in the Zen tradition says, only goes on a mountain path with 99 curves, only go straight. Right? Go straight on a mountain path with 99 curves. That's like a nice analogy for our life. Right? We walk straight ahead, but it's the road curves from left to right. It goes downhill. Sometimes we're slogging. Sometimes life is like walking, grinding uphill, walking with a gale and rain blowing in your face. Other times life is like the blue sky and the sun above, and we're strolling along and enjoying the view. The hermit rather, just remains silent. So the monk who's come to see the hermit has travelled a long way, so he's not satisfied with that. He's probably walked for 3 days or something, and so this might be like a little underwhelming. So he pushes on and says, "Well, how was it after you saw Nansen? Then what? Looking to get a little more. How was it after you trained studied with your meditation teacher for a long time?" Again, like back to the Buddha, it said that he exhausted his teacher's methods, learned their methods. His teachers said, "Do you want to be my successor?" And the Buddha said, "No, I've got more to do." And he went on. From my beginnings when I was practicing with tension, it's like I look back, I think the first time it was probably 1999 or something. So it's like 98, I think. So like 25 years or so ago. And then it was like, well, how is it afterwards? How was it after you saw Nansen? How was it after you've practiced for 10, 20 years? And the hermit replies, nothing special. Which is an interesting reply. What did you learn from all of your meditation, all of the Zoom meetings you've ever attended at ICD, or if you've been moonlighting with other sanghas, right? And it's like all of the practice that we've ever done together or alongside one another. What has that resulted in? What is the culmination of all of our retreats and books, study, not just in the Dharma, but in our broad experience of life? And the hermit says, nothing special. Is this a good answer? Is it a poor answer? Well, we could take it either way. You could say that this right now, it's nothing special. But does that denigrate this experience? Does it demean this experience? We could say not particularly special, or that nothing's special in the sense that everything is special. Sometimes people will say that about somebody. They'll say so-and-so is very special. Somebody will be marked out as a special person. But everything is special, isn't it? Everything is special. Everything is in its right place at the right time. There's a tree that's growing outside the window here, and one of the branches is turned brown and is dying, and the leaves are dead on that side, and the tree's listing a little bit to one side, fortunately away from the house, not toward it. Right? Nothing special, but also deeply special, beautiful. And whether that's the withered branch or the green branch, there's an equality. There's the equality of value there. It's all this. But that's the hermit's reply, and the monk's satisfied. Okay, I've got something I can take back to Chosa. I can report back. Puts on his puts a backpack on and turns around and goes back to the temple to see Chosa, and relates this story to Chosa. And Chosa says quite a lot here, and we can see something about how what he thinks of replies of silence and nothing special. Chosa says, "There is a person on top of 100-foot pole. Though they have a degree of understanding, it's not yet the real thing. From the top of a 100-foot pole, they should advance a step. Then the 10 directions of the world will be the entire body." The monk asks, "How do you advance a step?" Joseph says, "The mountains of Ro province, the waters of Ray province." The monk says, "I don't understand." Joseph remarks, "The 4 oceans and the 5 lakes are within the emperor's control." Difficult teacher to study with, right? I mean, it's just setting things up almost like a deep riddle. There's a lot in there. I wonder. I doubt this was off the cuff. He must have been like, you know what? When that monk, someone says that monk's coming back, and he's like, "All right, let me have a think about this a minute." I don't know. It seems a little bit rich to be off the cuff, but who knows? There is a person on top of a 100-foot pole. Gosh, I remember reading about this. I think they were called the stylites in the Middle Ages, early Middle Ages. Christian martyrs who climbed up on columns to pray and fast, and then never come down. They just stood on top of a column and stayed up there for years. There's one famous one. He was up there. I read about it earlier. He was up on this column for 37 years without coming down. Yeah, so I'm sure people must have been sending food and water up. Probably had a little hoist system or something going on. And then my mind goes to that place. Was just like, well, where did he go to the back? No, don't think about that. I mean, but what a tradition that was. Climb up on a column and refuse to leave. That's a little much for me. That style of practice. I'm more in line with these hermit practitioners of ancient China who just construct a simple hut in the deep forests in the mountains. That seems more my kind of speed, my kind of pace. But Chosa uses this example and says there's a person on top of a 100-foot pole talking about realization in meditation and in Dharma practice. Somebody who's stuck on top of a pole. And he's using this to illustrate where he's calling out the hermit for sticking. There's a person, it's like being stood on top of a 100-foot pole. Now there's a time in practice, in meditation practice, where sometimes we'll come to meditation. I know it was like this for me in the early days. There's a lot of early gains. There's like a lot of early wins in Dharma practice. Like we often have people join at Yokoji and other in our other sanghas, and people on first contact will come and they'll just be like, "This is amazing. I'm so happy I found this," and then you don't see them again. They'll come up and they'll do a couple of times or a few times, a couple of retreats, and maybe you don't see them again. Now life can branch off in many different ways, but I've seen it in my own experience and the experience of others, that in meditation there's and it acts as a real encouragement. We sit, the mind starts to calm down a little. We achieve an ability to stay present, to find a little peace of mind and return to the center somewhat, and there's some real benefit that's gleaned from the practice early on. But often as we go forward with Dharma practice into the real meat of it, into the discipline of practice over days and weeks and months and years, we might even find that we arrive at a place where it's, well, things can become a little stale, or there can be a sense of, is this it? Or is there some more and I somehow missed out on that? Or is this, I mean, is this really it? Almost sometimes with like a little edge of disappointment. Like, really? Is this? Okay, this is it, but there still seems something lacking or something missing, or surely there's got to be something more, something a little deeper, something, that's going to bring me home, something. Gosh, I've been at this for some years and I don't quite, perhaps, right? Is there something? Joseph says this is, it could be like being stuck on top of 100-foot pole. Though there's a degree of understanding, it's not quite yet the real thing. Yeah, we've traveled a long journey, but haven't quite landed the plane yet. Flown a long way, and yet there's still like feels like there's something a little more that needs to be done. So how is that accomplished? From the top of a 100-foot pole, he should, talking about the hermit, but for all of us, should advance a step. Step off the top of the 100-foot pole. This is a critical line in Zen Buddhism, a famous line about the nature of practice. Is how do you step forward from the top of a 100-foot pole? And we could think about some cheating, some methods. Well, I could set up a zip line, or I could, or things that, to try and intellectually cheat around it. Like any analogy, it's a little limited, we have to stay with it. There's no way to get down. It's 100 feet in the air. You can't, so how? But you have to. This really points to, in Zen, the nature of identified self. The me identity, the construction of me, which the construction of me is always a little stuck to the pole. If you're anything like me, I'm always a little stuck to me, right? My likes and dislikes, the preferences, the things, the opinions. But when that fixed kind of nature of me is like the one that's on top of the pole, that can't step forward, that stays in the known, that stays in the safe, stays in that place. There's a real irony at work here in Zen that Joseph said, what's required is to step forward. Now, of course, if one of these old mystics from the Middle Ages had stepped forward off the top of their pole, then, it's a swift, quick fall to the bottom. And it's over in that sense. That when we look at it through the Zen lens, when the self feels narrow, stuck, confined, defined, limited, that's the self that's lost in the stepping forward. That's the self that's thrown away in the leaping forward from the pole. Joseph says when this is done, the 10 directions of the world will be the entire body. Like it's all, up, down, left, back, however we can, in this case, it's 10 directions. The whole world is the body. This is the journey of the Buddha. This is the journey of Dharma practice. From the more limited, fixed nature of self, that we've all lived with that, the shift from a child, from a baby, from when this curious dualistic consciousness comes in and there's a contraction and the world is seen as out there and we're here and we might feel small and separate. The journey of practice is to move beyond the limited, fixed nature of self and experience the limitless broad nature of self. But that involves stepping off this pole. That involves losing something. Right? It's like Zen practice, I would say, it's a cultivation of loss. Right? That it's not a cultivation of gain. You can gain, you can become a teacher, you can get the certificate, and the plaudits of the titles. You can, and you can get gain in terms of, you can gain certain things. Okay, but all of that didn't satisfy the Buddha to gain the title or to gain certain techniques. But the cultivation of loss is a real, ironically, a huge positive. Throwing away and letting go of the limitations, the idea of me and other, the narrative that's constructed over and over again between the ears that separates and limits us. When we disrupt that, when we experience the self as like the fullness of the whole world, at least the fullness of the sphere of in our families, our work environment, our colleagues, because it's usually people that we find trouble with, right? We're like with each other as human beings. There's no end to that, and there certainly doesn't seem to be any end in sight. And in fact, moving into 2024, I think we're going to be ramping up the separation and the division, most likely. Right? How unfortunate. Because in our essence, in the truth of our essence, we're undivided. We're non-separated. There is a common thread and a common root. If we can bring that, if we realize that and we continue to practice that and we bring that alive, that's what's transmitted to others. That's how we connect. That's how we dissolve these barriers, on a local level and on a broader level, if that's your calling. How do you advance this? I realize it's such a long koan and I got 2 minutes. But Chosa, how do you do it? He asks Chosa. Chosa says, the mountains of Ro province, the waters of Ray province. How do you step forward from the top of the 100-foot pole? I could say the mountains of San Jacinto and the Salton Sea, right? Of the Pacific and the Sierra Nevada, the desert, the foothills. Monk says, I don't understand. Maybe Chosa should have just said, just jump. But he wants to say, this is your life. This is your life in every direction. You're already stepping off the pole. We're already falling. We're falling from the moment we're born. We're falling through life, through this journey. The good news is there's no ground. But there's a falling, right? You take that leap. The 4 oceans and the 5 lakes are within the emperor's control. So there's a reference to China too. It's just like, that was within the emperor's control. This is your life. The emperor, but a good king, like it's say in a Tao Te Ching, a successful king, a successful emperor. The essence of that is to be a servant, serves the people. That's a good Dharma practitioner. That's a good sangha member. We serve and help and support one another. That's what it is to be a ruler, not to command and to force people to do things, but to help and support as needed and to bring everyone along together. It's such a rare, it feels like a rare concept now, right? But how much then that all of us, how important this practice is, so that we can be beacons of light, that we can be examples of what it is to be a present, awake, caring, and in touch human being while we continue to fall off the pole. Again, it's a long koan, and I realize that just like talking here. So if you need to go, I won't feel bad if you need to go now. If you want to stay on for a couple of minutes, we'll run over. I'll just open it up if anyone has a comment and question before we do close. And I should remind us all that Marisol kindly dropped in the chat the various ways that we can support the Sangha, which is necessary for us to continue. So that's for all of us. Thanks you for that. If you'd like to unmute and bring anything up that's coming up for you, please do so. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for indulging me in a long talk. I wasn't intended to talk quite so long, but I hope it was useful. It's a long and a deep story, and I think we record these too. So if you wanted to revisit it, but you know what, I don't recommend that. Just keep stepping forward, right? Don't look back, go forward. We have a chant here that we have in training period of Hakuin Song as our Zen, and it says, "The Pure Land is near at hand." And more I'm seeing, like, in that sense in Dharma practice, it's always one step ahead. It's one step forward, right? But everything is unfolding in front, one step ahead. So whatever that is next for you, whether it's dinner, whether it's a cup of tea, whether it's a walk around the neighborhood, whatever that is, please let your mindful attention run loose. Yeah, and enjoy your environment, and please take good care of yourself as you do others. Thank you.